The other thing when it comes to relationships and ego and how other people's behaviors affect us and vice versa, is that often as part of this sort of tendency we have to personalize, we we interpret other people's actions towards us as, you know, deliberately towards us, whereas actually it's a manifestation of them. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I just think that plays into this conversation as well, because most of the time, if you are consistent, right, if you have your boundaries about how you operate, you've chosen, listen, I'm always going to be, these are my boundaries, this is how I want to operate in the world, I want to be fair, these are my values, this is how I want to treat people, this is how I, this is how I am going to go forth in the world. If you are consistently like that, but you then get an individual that is sort of, you know, hurting you in some way or kind of causing some discomfort in your mind, the chances are they are in pain or they are in some form of conflict with themselves, right? And so just recognizing that and saying, hold on, I haven't really probably done anything here particularly, but I'm experiencing this, from this individual. I think that can be really powerful. And then, I in those situations, I don't think one should just absorb, because it's really, like, this is something that they look at in positive psychology as well, to say, listen, positivity is not always appropriate, right? In domestic abuse, for example, positivity, forgiveness, all of these things, they are not appropriate. The emotions of anger and other negative emotions have a very, very important function, right? So I'm not saying that you just absorb somebody else's misery because, and you
Yeah.
take take it for them, but just appreciating why you are experiencing some of that from their actions can just help you in the way you navigate those relationships. And either it can help to normalize, because they like, okay, well, this person is always fair and they can go through their own journey, and when they've gone through their journey, they may well be like, oh great, this person was always consistent in there and fair and decent to me. Or maybe they never will, and it's not for you to control. But so anyway, I just wanted to put that out there, because that does come up a lot. Like, I often am coming in when people are having very problematic relationships at work, or there could be, a personal relationship, but probably where I see it more is in the workplace. And if I have had, say, 2 or 3 sessions with a client and they've got a problematic relationship in the workplace, and after 3 sessions, the pattern is still very strongly demonstrating itself, the chances are that, like, 6 months on, that person that they're working with is no longer in the organization. Because, and this is based on literally my experience of many, many different clients, is that often it's because they're working with a very difficult character, and that difficult character is going through their own difficulties and is actually not going to survive in the organization. So I think it can be very helpful to remember, when we experience negative stuff from others, that it's probably because of their own internal pain.
Yeah, I think
I
like
just
it's
wanted to throw
also
that in there.
I think it's also important to keep in mind that that has been really helping me when it comes to communication, that there's a reason why people act certain way. A lot of times it has nothing to do with you. That's like, even like when somebody gets angry, that might be just a coping mechanism that they have learned that actually works for them. It doesn't have to do like anything with you. Or and like, even like a bit of detachment as well, where to be able to maybe detach a bit emotionally from that like situation as it's happening. I think it takes a lot of practice to get to that place, but I know that for me it's been helpful to first check within myself how I feel, if there's something that they say that is triggering me, and then like work with that as they are speaking or shouting, whatever they are doing. um, but also as they speak, listen if whether whatever they are saying, let's say, if that's actually relevant, if that's actually true. So let's say, oh, if I don't wash my dishes and you shout at me, well, that's like, it's pretty much a fact. So I can't really argue back at that. Maybe I can argue on the way they deliver the message, but the message is pretty much true. But if it's not true, then I would probably work towards understanding whether I'm understanding it wrong, or maybe in my perception it's not true, but it's actually true in their perception. And I think and I had a conversation in the previous episode about that it's important, let's say in a relationship, when you argue, actually make sure that you understand the person right, instead of assuming, I know what you're thinking, you are this way, and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm also thinking that one of the best things that you can do in the situation that you described is just say, I'm noticing that you're really angry here. I'm noticing, and I'm noticing that your reaction is actually making me, quite stressed here. And that, I mean, to get to that point it's not going to happen overnight, but
Oh, yeah.
it's even before
I think like even
Alstra has
telling
had to
them
do
that
the
you are
work
being
herself.
angry, I think you can just trigger them even more if you point out that you're being angry.
You can, or you could say, look, I'm noticing you're upset here.
Yeah.
Right. So it comes from more of a place of empathy, because actually anger is often just, people have sort of, lost control of their
Yeah.
emotions and they're feeling rage. And so they actually deserve, I mean, I say this because I have a 4-year-old. So when it comes to him, he's been my biggest teacher, because so actually this is another thing that plays in here, is with the chimp paradox has been a very useful book, both in managing my son and also for my clients. They found it really helpful. So the chimp paradox, if you've not come across it, is a
Oh, I
great
have
book.
read it.
And it does actually, you have you?
Yeah.
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 And again, it goes into, you were talking before about ego and the different types of the brain and things like that, or how we detach ourselves. And I find that the chimp piece can be really, really useful way of detaching. So, I would say to my son, okay, so your chimp seems really upset right now. What does your chimp need? And he really relates to that. I think maybe as when you're young, you can be quite visual, or you've got a good imagination, so it really makes sense to him. But it works for clients as well, because they're like, oh, I understand now why they are, this person always gets triggered and acts out. Now you're like, I can see how their chimp is reacting, then how my chimp reacts to their chimp. And so because when somebody's chimp goes, then the other person's chimp gets activated as well. So it's like, in your angry dishwashing conversation, it's like, I can see that your chimp is out right on that about these dishes, and actually that is now triggering my chimp. And so I'm not saying that this is always going to be a possible conversation, but just where it is, or even being able to articulate these things in ourselves, it can be really helpful before we even try and solve a problem. It can diffuse things, it can diffuse the problem. So that's what I advocate first, because then the situation is very hard to know what was going on in the situation, what triggered them to be angry, what's gone on. But just to be able to say, I can see that you're upset, and actually that's making me now, that alone often is not said in
Yeah.
in tricky conversations. And when it is, it can bring a lot more awareness into that conversation and make it a more productive conversation.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, even like, I think what you said about the chimp, I think one really big thing that it's helping with is to kind of take out the I of equation, where it's not like me, where you don't take it as personally. You're just like, this is the chimp. It's not like me, it's the chimp side of me. So that's when you are able to make, and when you tell it to somebody else, they're like, oh, that's my chimp. Like it's like you don't maybe offend them as much, or maybe not trigger them as much, because they're aware that, okay, this is just a chimp. It's not like me at the core who is like me.